Millionaire husband finds out his mistress lied his pregnant wife, had the last laugh. They say behind every grand fortune lies a secret. For Alexander Bennett, a self-made millionaire with everything a man could possibly desire, luxury cars, a sprawling penthouse overlooking Manhattan, and a beautiful, loving wife, the secret cut deeper than any financial figure. When a beguiling mistress named Veronica Clark slipped into his life, it threatened to shatter his perfect world and his wife Helena's dreams, especially when Helena revealed she was pregnant. But this story isn't just about betrayal, it's about the shocking truth that rips the mask off a twisted deception and the sweet, poetic justice that leaves the guilty gasping for air. Alexander Bennett was not born with a silver spoon. He had earned every cent that gleamed in his bank account through relentless determination and a touch of genius. His innovations in software as a service technology had garnered attention from major industry giants, including Apple, where he sealed one of his first multi-million-dollar contracts. Fresh out of graduate school, Alexander had already caught the world's eye with his digital marketing solutions. By his early 30s, he established Bennett Tech, a tech conglomerate headquartered in a sleek, glass-walled skyscraper in Midtown Manhattan. At the pinnacle of his success, it seemed nothing could slow him down. A few years before the scandal that would upend his life, Alexander fell head over heels for Helena Hathaway, later Helena Bennett. She had grown up with modest means, but possessed a radiant heart and an unbreakable spirit that matched Alexander's drive. Helena wasn't particularly interested in the glitz and glamour that came with her husband's newfound wealth. She was far too busy volunteering at local community centers and supporting children's literacy programs. That genuine kindness was what Alexander found irresistible. He saw in her a reflection of his own desire to make a mark in the world, but in a gentler, more nurturing way. They married at the Plaza Hotel, surrounded by relatives, friends, and countless business partners. It was one of those weddings that the society pages covered with lavish praise. The bride's gown was a custom-made piece from a top designer. The floral arrangements cost more than most people earned in a month, and the reception featured gourmet cuisine from a Michelin-starred chef. But beyond the extravagance, there was an unmistakable tenderness between the newlyweds. Everyone whispered that this union was built on respect, love, and real compatibility, a refreshing change from so many superficial marriages in high society. For several years, life continued in a blissful routine of progress. Alexander soared higher with every new business deal. Helena, too, flourished in her philanthropic work. They purchased a penthouse on Fifth Avenue with breathtaking views of Central Park. They took yearly vacations to exotic destinations, spending nights at the Ritz in London or strolling along the sparkling beaches of Bali. On these trips, they laughed about how improbable their love story seemed, a billionaire tech guru and a gentle soul whose life's mission was to help the underprivileged. By the time Helena announced she was pregnant, their marriage was in a place that most couples only dream of. Alexander was beaming with excitement about fatherhood, and Helena was quietly glowing with maternal radiance. They planned a future where their child would grow up in a home filled with both affluence and empathy, a home that balanced privilege with principle. It wasn't just the arrival of a baby that excited them, it was the promise of a deeper bond, the next chapter, in a love story that had already defied so many odds. Yet behind the glossy magazine covers, behind the success stories, behind the playful banter that made them appear invincible, cracks were beginning to form. As Alexander's net worth soared, so did the demands on his time. Investors wanted more product releases. Partners wanted expansions. Clients wanted his presence at late-night dinners and private events. And in those late-night soirees, swirling with champagne and driven by ambition, Alexander encountered women who viewed him as a golden ticket. Most of them were just passing fancies in the social circle, but one in particular caught his eye and refused to let go. Veronica Clark entered Alexander's life under the pretext of being a potential marketing consultant for one of Bennett Tech's new projects. She was introduced at a high-stakes corporate event hosted by a Fortune 500 company. With her impeccable fashion sense, tailored suits, expensive heels, and a razor-sharp wit, Veronica could intrigue even the most discerning socialite. Alexander was taken by her confidence. She was quick to lavish praise on his achievements, quick to laugh at his jokes, and swift to mirror his own ambitions with a seductive twist. Before he realized the danger, Alexander found himself drawn to Veronica's world. She was not just physically alluring, she radiated a kind of cunning intelligence that made him feel simultaneously challenged and flattered. The flirtation began innocently enough: late-night calls to discuss strategies, spontaneous lunches at upscale restaurants near the Empire State Building. Soon, it evolved into stolen kisses in the back of a limo and secret weekends at boutique hotels in Soho. Despite the guilt that gnawed at him, Alexander rationalized it as a mere diversion, a fling that relieved stress and had no bearing on his marriage. He convinced himself Helena would never find out, and that it wouldn't matter even if she did after all. Their marriage was stable, secure, a fortress no mistress could penetrate. In his arrogance, he underestimated both the depth of Helena's devotion and the cunning that Veronica was about to unleash. Helena first sensed something amiss a few weeks before she confirmed her pregnancy. It was a subtle shift in Alexander's behavior. He was more guarded with his phone, more secretive about his schedule. He began leaving early in the morning under the guise of urgent meetings and returning home late, the faint smell of someone else's perfume clinging to his suits. The changes were so incremental that Helena sometimes wondered if her suspicions were just pregnancy hormones warping her perceptions. But Helena was no fool. She had known Alexander for too long not to notice these telltale signs of distance. Confusion and sadness clouded her thoughts. Rather than hurl accusations, she tried to draw him out, inviting him to dinners prepared with love, offering foot massages when he seemed weary, or suggesting they spend a weekend out of town. Alexander responded with hollow apologies about how busy things were at work, leaving Helena disappointed but still determined to hold the marriage together. Her close friend, Sophie, was the first to mention the rumors swirling around their social circle. Sophie had overheard a conversation at a charity gala about Alexander being seen with another woman at an exclusive lounge. Helena's immediate instinct was denial. She just couldn't envision Alexander risking their marriage, especially after they'd dreamed of having a child for so long. Yet the seed of doubt had been planted. Each time Alexander came home with that anxious look, each time he avoided her eyes while speaking, the seed grew into a budding suspicion. Alexander, on the other hand, sensed Helena's tension but was too embroiled in his affair to address it. Veronica's hold on him was growing stronger. She was a master manipulator, skilled at giving him just enough emotional and physical excitement to keep him enthralled. Alexander told himself he was in control after all. He was the millionaire boss, wasn't he? But Veronica had her own ambitions, and she was patient. The more entangled he became, the more power she wielded. In an attempt to placate Helena and perhaps soothe his own guilt, Alexander began buying her extravagant gifts. A limited edition necklace from Tiffany and Company, a custom-designed stroller for their unborn baby, flowers delivered every Friday to the penthouse. Helena accepted them with forced smiles, but she could sense his emotional absence behind those gifts. Like tokens offered to a shrine, they felt hollow without genuine devotion. As Helena's suspicions grew, she found solace in her work with children's charities. She would spend hours at the local center reading stories to kids who rarely experience such kindness. She also immersed herself in planning for the baby, decorating the nursery, researching the best prenatal care facilities, and carefully monitoring her health. If Alexander was slipping away from her, at least she would protect this little life inside her from the heartbreak of the outside world. But heartbreak has a way of creeping in, no matter how well you try to guard against it. One afternoon, while tidying Alexander's study, Helena stumbled upon a receipt from an exclusive spa in Soho. The date matched one of the business trips Alexander claimed he had to take. Confronted with tangible evidence, Helena felt a swirl of emotions: betrayal, anger, sadness, and even a strange sense of relief that she wasn't going crazy. She took a photo of the receipt and tucked it back where she found it, choosing not to confront Alexander that night. She wanted more solid proof before she took any drastic steps. Veronica Clark was not the type of woman who was satisfied with merely being a fling. Her early life had been marred by financial struggle. She grew up envying the wealthy families she saw on TV. When her sharp mind and persuasive personality opened doors into high society, she became determined not just to survive, but to thrive in that elite world. She saw Alexander as the golden goose, a charismatic millionaire with the potential to give her the life she believed she deserved. But Veronica had sensed that Alexander, for all his bravado, was still tethered to his wife by genuine love, at least in some corner of his heart. She knew that if she wanted a permanent slice of his fortune, she would need leverage. It wasn't enough to be the woman who sated his secret desires. She had to persuade him that she was indispensable, that leaving her would pose too great a risk, be it financial or emotional. The first step of her plan was to isolate him from Helena. She began planting subtle doubts in Alexander's mind about Helena's dedication to him. "Are you sure she's as innocent as you think?" she would murmur in his ear during their stolen moments. She made snide remarks about Helena's philanthropic activities, implying Helena was more preoccupied with her charity work than with supporting Alexander's ambitions. These seeds of paranoia might have seemed feeble at first, but Alexander, already grappling with guilt and the complexities of his personal life, allowed them to linger. Veronica also tried to endear herself to Alexander's business associates. Through cunning networking, she inserted herself into corporate events as a consultant. She wined and dined potential partners, always dropping hints about her close relationship with Alexander. Whenever Alexander expressed concern about the ethics of mixing business with a personal affair, Veronica feigned hurt, claiming she was only trying to help. This emotional manipulation was often effective, especially when accompanied by tearful declarations of devotion, which only served to deepen Alexander's confusion. One night, after a particularly glamorous fundraiser, Veronica made her boldest move yet. She cornered Alexander in the back seat of his chauffeured car and whispered that she had been feeling unwell and believed she might be pregnant. Although she provided no actual proof, the suggestion alone rattled Alexander. He tried to question her calmly, but Veronica deflected, playing the role of a vulnerable woman who might be carrying his child. Alexander panicked. How would he handle two pregnant women, his wife and his mistress? What if Veronica started making demands that jeopardized his marriage and public reputation? Though inwardly she was giddy about his alarm, Veronica outwardly maintained the act of a distraught woman. She told Alexander that if this turned out to be true, he would need to provide for her and the baby. She laced her words with vague threats, reminding him that her silence about their affair had a price. Alexander, paralyzed by fear of scandal, offered to pay for her medical tests and anything else she needed. But in exchange, he pleaded for discretion. This negotiation was precisely the dynamic Veronica had been aiming to establish. Unaware of the latest development with Veronica, Helena felt her own baby bump growing each day, a tangible reminder that time was running out for her to confront Alexander. She had collected more evidence of his deceit: suspicious hotel reservations, credit card charges for expensive jewelry that never found its way to her. The heartbreak was almost unbearable. Yet she clung to the hope that her husband might still love her enough to confess and seek forgiveness. Sophie, the loyal friend who refused to let Helena endure this alone, encouraged her to hire a private investigator. "If he's cheating on you and you have proof, you'll have the upper hand," Sophie urged one late afternoon over coffee at a Starbucks in Midtown. "I know you want to forgive him, but you need the facts, Helena." While Helena was reluctant to take such a drastic measure, the prospect of clarity, finally knowing the full extent of the betrayal, pushed her to do it. The investigator's name was Marcus Powell, a retired NYPD detective with a knack for uncovering hidden truths. He approached Helena's case with a cool professionalism. Over a few weeks, he gathered photographic evidence of Alexander's clandestine meetings with Veronica, phone records, even timed entries of Veronica visiting Bennett Tech's private offices late at night. Marcus's thoroughness left little room for doubt. Alexander was deeply involved with Veronica. Armed with indisputable proof, Helena wrestled with how to confront her husband. Each time she felt the baby move, she questioned whether it was better to try and salvage their marriage for the sake of their child. Yet the more she learned, the clearer it became that Alexander's betrayal was not a mere lapse in judgment, but a sustained, manipulative affair. She tried to remember the man she fell in love with, the ambitious, warm-hearted dreamer who had once been her hero. She wondered if he even existed anymore beneath the layers of greed, guilt, and seduction. Helena's resolve solidified during a hospital visit for her prenatal checkup. While waiting for her name to be called, she overheard two expectant mothers discussing how they wanted to give their children a home filled with trust and honesty. Tears pooled in Helena's eyes. She realized she couldn't welcome a newborn into a world overshadowed by secrets and manipulation. If Alexander wouldn't come clean on his own, she would have to force his hand. One final conversation might decide everything, whether they would continue together as a family or part ways, leaving Helena to raise her child alone. In a quiet moment that evening, Helena confronted Alexander with the receipts, the hotel bills, and the phone records. She tried to keep her voice steady, though her heart pounded wildly. She laid out every piece of evidence on their marble kitchen counter, forming a damning collage of betrayal. Alexander, cornered and unable to deny the blatant truth, fell silent. 1,000 excuses died on his tongue. He saw the heartbreak on Helena's face, the unwavering gaze that said she would not be gaslighted. And for the first time, he realized the depth of the damage he had inflicted. Yet even in that moment of truth, Alexander could not bring himself to mention Veronica's possible pregnancy. The fear of losing Helena completely paralyzed him. It was one thing to admit to an affair. It was another to reveal he might have impregnated his mistress. With trembling words, he tried to plead for forgiveness, promising it was over, that it had meant nothing, that he loved only Helena. But Helena was no longer the naive wife he imagined would quietly accept his contrition. She demanded time. She demanded space. She wanted him out of the penthouse while she decided her next move. Alexander retreated to a luxury hotel suite downtown that night, terrified that everything he'd built, his marriage, his future fatherhood, his cherished reputation, was on the verge of collapse. Veronica, hearing that Helena had confronted him, seized the opportunity to accelerate her plans. She texted Alexander incessantly, pressing him to stand by her to confirm their own baby's future. Alexander, lost in guilt and confusion, tried to ignore her, but Veronica was relentless. The stage was set for an explosive confrontation that none of them could have predicted. With Alexander living out of suitcases in an upscale suite at the Lowell, Veronica saw an opening to close the trap. One evening, she invited him to her apartment, claiming she had vital updates. Hesitant and emotionally frayed, Alexander went, half expecting another argument or meltdown. What he found instead was an elaborate dinner, complete with candlelight, soft music, and a plastered smile across Veronica's face. He could sense the tension behind her eyes, the hungry desperation for permanence in his life. Over wine and a lavish meal, Veronica announced that her blood tests were positive. She was pregnant, she insisted, arching an eyebrow as she awaited his reaction. Alexander's heart sank. This was the scenario he had dreaded since their affair began. If true, it complicated everything: Helena's pregnancy, his business empire, his public image. He demanded to see the medical records. Veronica promised she'd provide them soon, but conveniently mentioned how she didn't want to share them just yet because of personal privacy. She painted a picture of herself as a heartbroken mistress carrying his child, with no idea how to navigate the future. Yet something in Veronica's demeanor gave Alexander pause. Was it the almost theatrical way she announced it? The sly hints that his immense resources would now have to support 2 babies? A flicker of doubt crossed his mind. Could she be lying about the pregnancy entirely? Or perhaps if she was pregnant, there was a question of who the father might be. Still, he was in no position to call her a liar outright. If she was telling the truth, calling her bluff could be disastrous. Cornered, Alexander tried to reason. He offered to support her discreetly if she truly was pregnant with his child. But the meltdown he feared was immediate. Veronica raged, accusing him of wanting to hide her and the baby like a dirty secret. She threatened to go to the tabloids with the full story, painting him as a heartless billionaire who abandoned his mistress. She threatened to contact Helena and reveal everything, although Helena already knew about the affair. Her voice shook with manufactured fury, but Alexander also sensed a real desperation. Veronica saw her chance for a secure future slipping away. To calm her, Alexander promised that once the paternity was confirmed, he would do the right thing. That phrase, however, inflamed Veronica even more. She snapped back, "I won't be tested like some lab rat. You'll take responsibility now." This was a woman who had meticulously planned every step, and Alexander was in the center of her trap, struggling to find a way out. In the end, she forced him to leave that night with the threat hanging over his head: either recognize her claim unequivocally or risk a public scandal that could destroy his marriage and business deals. Meanwhile, Helena had retreated to a calmer environment at her sister's countryside property on the outskirts of New York. Among the rolling hills and fresh air, she found moments of solace far from the luxury penthouse that still held memories of her marital bliss. She needed a safe space to decide what her future would be, whether it included Alexander or not. She had not yet forgiven him, nor had she decided on a divorce. She only knew she needed clarity and peace for the sake of her unborn child. She spent her days journaling her thoughts, recalling the early days of her relationship with Alexander, the stolen kisses in cramped apartments. When they were both just starting out, the spontaneous midnight walks in Central Park, the unwavering support he offered when her mother fell ill. Those recollections clashed harshly with the present reality of credit card bills for illicit hotel stays and the nauseating feeling of betrayal. The emotional whiplash was overwhelming. Sophie visited every weekend, bringing groceries, moral support, and updates about Alexander. She urged Helena to consider a future without him. "Don't let him drag you down," Sophie would say, always with that fierce loyalty in her eyes. "You're strong on your own. But Helena still wrestled with the idea of raising her child alone. She had to be sure she wasn't letting anger overshadow a chance at rebuilding. Alexander had, after all, been a good man once or so, she believed. Could he still be redeemed? Then, out of the blue, Helena received a call from Alexander, his voice trembling with unease. He admitted that Veronica might be pregnant. The revelation, even though she had suspected something along those lines, struck Helena like a physical blow. She stayed silent for a long moment, letting the air crackle with tension. Then, in a controlled but firm tone, she demanded proof. If Veronica was truly pregnant, they needed to be certain of paternity. Even as she asked, part of her wondered whether she could endure the pain of sharing Alexander with another woman's child. Alexander promised to handle it and to stay in touch with updates. Helena ended the call feeling oddly resolute. The heartbreak was no longer the scorching flame. It was settling into a cold, steely determination. She decided she would protect her baby above all else, whether that meant divorce, custody battles, or rebuilding trust. She resolved to focus on her health, to remain as stress-free as possible. And if Alexander truly wanted to salvage their marriage, he had to fight for it by confronting Veronica's claims head-on. No more secrets, no more half-truths. Alexander began to suspect that Veronica was fabricating her pregnancy, so he reached out to a specialized security and investigative team. The cost was astronomical, but if it saved him from making a grave mistake, it would be worth every penny. The investigators gathered information on Veronica's medical visits, pharmacy purchases, and personal history. It was legal gray area, but desperation had clouded Alexander's moral compass. He was determined to uncover the truth at any cost. In less than a week, the investigators delivered an unsettling report. There was no evidence that Veronica had visited any obstetrician or gynecologist. Pharmacy records showed no prenatal vitamins or related prescriptions. Their background check also revealed a previous incident. Veronica had once claimed to be pregnant by another wealthy individual, only for the claim to be quietly dropped once financial settlements were negotiated. The pattern was clear. Veronica seemed to use phantom pregnancies as leverage against affluent men. Furious and humiliated, Alexander confronted Veronica at her apartment, brandishing the investigators' findings like a sword. Initially, she tried to deny everything, feigning outrage at his invasion of privacy. But when pressed with the details, her facade crumbled. She admitted she wasn't pregnant, but claimed she did it out of love. She was terrified of losing him. The confession was laced with crocodile tears and pleas for Alexander to leave Helena for her. She argued that Helena was the intruder, that she was the one who truly understood him. Alexander felt revulsion, and for the first time, clarity. He realized how deeply he had entangled himself in Veronica's manipulative schemes. He threatened legal action, warning her to never contact him again or risk a lawsuit that would expose her pattern of deception. She laughed bitterly, telling him he wouldn't dare because the publicity would harm his precious reputation. Yet Alexander was beyond caring about the scandal. He was prepared to sacrifice his public image if it meant freeing himself from Veronica's clutches. He walked out of that apartment feeling lighter, but also aware of the massive atonement he owed Helena. The question now was whether she would ever take him back. He had deceived her, wounded her, and nearly destroyed the trust that formed the bedrock of their marriage. If Helena could find it in her heart to forgive him, Alexander was determined to prove he was worthy. But the next hurdle was telling Helena the entire story, including the fact that he had even entertained the notion of Veronica's fake pregnancy. Helena stood outside the sleek glass doors of Bennett Tech's executive lounge, her heartbeat thudding in her ears. The imposing structure, nestled in the heart of Midtown Manhattan, had once represented the pinnacle of her husband's success, a realm where Alexander's brilliance shone brightest. Now, it felt more like a battlefield where she would face the raw truth of his betrayal. She took a breath, placed one hand on the gentle swell of her belly, and stepped inside. The lobby was awash in sharp, modern angles, marble floors, brushed steel railings, and minimalist artwork on the walls. Ordinarily, Helena might have admired the decor. Today, the sleekness of the surroundings only emphasized the cold tension swirling in her gut. An impeccably dressed receptionist recognized her immediately and wordlessly waved her through to the private executive lounge without the usual pleasantries. It was clear everyone at Bennett Tech knew something was amiss. Helena found Alexander waiting near the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the glittering cityscape. The skyline seemed to stretch infinitely, a reminder of how vast their world had become and how small she felt in the face of his deceptions. He wore a tailored suit, but his tie was loosened and his normally confident posture had deflated into something almost pitiable. A half-finished glass of water sat on a nearby table, a testament to how uneasy he was. "Helena," he said softly, stepping forward. She nodded in acknowledgement, eyes guarded. This was the man she had loved so fiercely, the man she had imagined raising a family with in a home filled with warmth and honesty. But as she took in the dark circles beneath his eyes, she could only think of the lies, the late-night business meetings, and the overwhelming loneliness she had felt during those months of suspicion. "Let's not waste time," she said, voice taut. She placed a stack of neatly organized documents on the glass tabletop. They were printouts of text messages, credit card bills for suspicious hotel stays, and photographs taken by the private investigator she'd reluctantly hired. These speak for themselves. Alexander glanced at the evidence, his face twisting in shame. She could see the moment he realized there was no point in denying it. The veneer he had built around himself, wealth, power, influence, shattered before her eyes. He swallowed hard. "I'm sorry," he began, his voice trembling. "I never wanted to hurt you. I never wanted any of this to happen." Helena let out a bitter laugh, though tears threatened to spill from the corners of her eyes. "You never wanted it to happen, yet you made choices, one after another, that led right here." She gestured to the file of damning proof. "How could you betray me like this, especially when we were about to start a family?" Alexander's gaze shifted toward her belly, the curve that held their unborn child, a child who would one day learn about the foundation of trust and integrity that was supposed to exist between parents. "I was weak," he said, voice cracking. "I was enthralled by the excitement, the danger, and Veronica knew exactly how to manipulate that. But it's no excuse. I take full responsibility." Helena had imagined this moment in countless nightmares, confronting him, hearing his explanations, excuses, really and grappling with a surge of sorrow and fury all at once. Yet now that she stood here, she found herself numb. The time for emotional outbursts had passed. This was a moment of reckoning. She needed clarity more than rage. She inhaled slowly, recalling how she had once admired Alexander's confidence, his vision for a better future fueled by technological innovation. That same drive and ambition had brought them wealth and influence beyond their wildest dreams, but it had also cast shadows she hadn't seen until it was almost too late. "Tell me everything," she demanded, crossing her arms protectively over her stomach. "Tell me about Veronica, about the claims that she was pregnant with your child. Don't leave anything out." "I deserve the truth." Alexander began to pace, raking a hand through his hair. "She came into my life as a consultant, a marketing genius, with brilliant ideas and a real zest for business. At least, that was my initial impression, but it turned into something else. She was flattering me, feeding my ego. I let it happen because part of me was bored, maybe, or feeling invincible." He paused, guilt clouding his features. "And then she started making threats, lies, that she was pregnant, that I would be responsible for another child. I even believed her for a time. At this revelation, Helena felt her chest tighten. She had suspected something along these lines, but hearing him say it out loud was a harsh confirmation. "How could you be so careless?" she asked, her tone laced with pain. "We were building a family. Did that mean nothing to you?" His shoulders sagged, and for the first time since she arrived, Helena saw genuine anguish behind his eyes. "I know it looks like I threw everything away. Maybe I did, but you mean the world to me. He cut himself off, taking a moment to steady his breathing. "I made a horrible mistake. I let my pride rule me. And once I realized how deep I'd fallen, I was terrified. I tried to hide it all, but it only made things worse." They stood in strained silence, the buzz of the air conditioning the only audible sound in the lounge. Helena forced herself to hold his gaze. She needed to see every flicker of regret, every hint of doubt. She wanted no illusions this time. "So she lied about her pregnancy," Helena said, wanting to confirm it explicitly. "Your investigators found proof of that?" Alexander nodded. "Yes, I confronted her with the evidence, and she finally admitted she made the whole thing up to keep me tied to her. It was all about control, but that doesn't erase the fact that I was unfaithful, that I slept with her, that I lied to you for months." Helena pressed her lips together, fighting back the sting of tears. She remembered the nights she had spent alone in their penthouse, the hours of worry when he wouldn't pick up her calls, the heartbreak of finding receipts for romantic dinners and spa treatments. She remembered how she had felt her sense of self-worth slip away, little by little, as she questioned what she'd done to push him into another woman's arms. "You risked our marriage, our future, and our child's security for a woman you barely knew," Helena said. At last, her voice trembling with barely contained emotion. "I needed you, Alexander, especially after we found out I was pregnant, and you gave me flimsy excuses and material gifts instead of genuine love. You made me feel like I was losing my mind." Alexander's eyes glistened with tears. "I was selfish. I took you for granted. I convinced myself you'd always be there. And that was my gravest mistake." Helena clenched her fists, recalling every moment of isolation she had endured. But she also knew she needed to keep a clear head for her own sake and for the baby's. "I'm not making any decisions about our future tonight," she stated firmly. "I'm going to talk to my lawyer. I'm going to think about what's best for me and for our child. And if we move forward at all, it will be on my terms. Do you understand?" He nodded without hesitation. "I understand. I'll do whatever it takes, give you time, space, anything. I'll sign anything. I'll go to therapy. Helena raised a hand, silencing him. "This isn't about money." "It never was. You forgot that somewhere along the line, but I didn't. You can't buy back trust with big gestures or legal documents. I need to see consistency. I need to see genuine remorse." The tension between them was palpable, crackling in the air. Alexander looked as though 1,000 emotions were coursing through him: shame, regret, longing, desperation. Once, she might have rushed to comfort him. Now, she held her ground. She refused to let her empathy overshadow the betrayal. "Helena, please," he whispered, taking a step closer, arms outstretched. "I beg you to find it in your heart to let me make this right." She stood still, every muscle tense, forcing herself not to reach out. "We'll see," she said, her voice less harsh now, but no less certain. "Right now, I can't give you anything more than the possibility that I'll listen." In that moment, Helena thought about their child, about the life that deserved two loving parents, free from the tangles of deceit. She thought about her younger self, the woman who had fallen in love with an ambitious dreamer who always had a spark of kindness in his eyes. Was that man still in there, battered by his own poor decisions, but redeemable nonetheless? Or was he gone for good, replaced by someone she could never fully trust again? Turning away, she gathered her documents and headed for the door, leaving Alexander alone in the hush of the lounge. As she walked down the marble corridor, her heels clicking with each determined step, Helena felt a strange mixture of heartbreak and resolve. Their marriage had been dealt a devastating blow, but she wasn't the naive, lover-struck girl she once was. She was a mother-to-be, a woman who knew her worth, and a partner who demanded the respect she deserved. Behind her, Alexander remained frozen, staring at the empty space she'd left behind. In the hush of that luxurious setting, once the pinnacle of his accomplishments, he was finally forced to confront the true cost of his betrayal. And in that solitude, the weight of his mistakes settled upon him like a crushing burden, one he would spend the coming days and weeks desperately trying to lift, hoping that he wasn't already too late. Days turned into weeks. Helena remained with her sister, focusing on self-care and preparing for the final months of pregnancy. She continued volunteering at the local children's center, finding comfort in the innocently curious eyes of the kids she read stories to. Meanwhile, Alexander launched himself into a personal redemption campaign. He cut off all contact with Veronica, dealt with the fallout of business rumors, and immersed himself in couples therapy sessions, even though Helena wasn't yet willing to attend. He read books on fidelity and marital counseling, looking for any roadmap to repair what he'd broken. One afternoon, while reviewing legal documents about potential divorce proceedings, Helena received a knock on her sister's front door. She opened it to find Alexander standing there, holding a bouquet of sunflowers, her favorite. He wasn't dressed in his usual suit, but wore a simple sweater and jeans, looking almost like the earnest graduate student she had met long ago. She hesitated, not sure whether to invite him in or tell him to leave. In her heart, she couldn't deny that part of her still cared deeply for him. In a quiet voice, Alexander told her he'd been volunteering at a women's shelter, wanting to do something meaningful to atone. He didn't expect her to forgive him, but he wanted her to know he was trying to become better. He then presented her with a written commitment, his vow to seek therapy, to be a present father, to respect her boundaries, and to sign over a chunk of his assets to a trust fund for the baby, ensuring financial security independent of their marital status. Helena felt tears prick at her eyes. She motioned for him to come inside, where they talked for hours in the living room. He listened as she laid out all the pain and betrayal she had felt, her doubts, her fears, and her anger. He didn't offer excuses or glib assurances this time. He only responded with genuine remorse and a willingness to prove himself through actions. For the first time in months, Helena sensed a sliver of honesty returning to their interactions. By the end of their conversation, Helena agreed to let Alexander attend the next prenatal checkup with her. It wasn't a grand reconciliation, but it was a gentle opening of a door that had been slammed shut. That night, Alexander returned to his hotel, feeling both unworthy and profoundly grateful. Perhaps there was a chance, a tiny, fragile chance, that their family could still be saved. But Veronica was not quite done. Alexander's abrupt exit from her life had left her reeling and furious. Unable to get through to him by phone or text, she tried to ambush him in public settings, only to be blocked by his bodyguards. Each rejection fueled her desperation. She knew her pregnancy lie had been exposed, but she refused to let go. She was convinced that if she couldn't have Alexander, she would at least make sure Helena and the world saw him for the man he was. Days before Helena's baby shower, an event she was hesitant to hold but eventually agreed to for her friends, Veronica launched her final salvo. She sent Helena an envelope filled with photos of her and Alexander in compromising positions at the boutique hotel suite they had frequented. The note attached read, "You deserve to see the truth of your faithful husband. Once a cheater, always a cheater. It was an obvious attempt to reopen old wounds, to sabotage any reconciliation. The photos arrived just after Helena and Alexander had returned from a doctor's appointment where they heard their baby's heartbeat together. The high of that joyful moment clashed violently with the images she now held in her trembling hands. Anger and hurt flared anew, but something within Helena had shifted. The last few weeks, she had watched Alexander transform, attending therapy sessions with her, volunteering, and making real efforts to regain her trust. The photos were indeed heartbreaking, but they were also old. She suspected Veronica was using them to sabotage the progress she and Alexander were making. That evening, Helena confronted Alexander calmly, showing him the envelope. He paled, recalling those stolen moments of lust and how they'd come back to haunt him. Unlike before, he didn't stutter or try to hide. He acknowledged that those were from the early days of the affair. He reminded Helena that he had cut ties with Veronica completely and was devoted to repairing their relationship. Tears welled in his eyes, but he didn't beg. He simply stated the truth. For Helena, it was a test of her resolve to move forward. She took a deep breath, set the photos aside, and met Alexander's gaze. "You need to deal with her once and for all," she said, her tone resolute. "If she's going to keep trying to destroy us, then you need to protect our family." Alexander nodded, fully aware that this was his last chance to safeguard the fragile trust that had begun to regrow. Determined to end Veronica's meddling, Alexander consulted his legal team, who drew up a comprehensive cease and desist order, threatening civil litigation if Veronica continued with her harassment or defamation attempts. They also prepared to seek a restraining order if necessary. Alexander personally handed Veronica the legal documents in the lobby of her apartment building, accompanied by 2 security personnel who recorded the interaction. Veronica erupted in fury, hurling insults and proclaiming that she would never let Helena win. But the presence of security cameras and bystanders subdued her threats. Alexander left the documents with her and walked away, the final severing of a tie that had become a living nightmare. Over the next few weeks, Veronica tried in vain to garner sympathy from tabloids, but Alexander's lawyers quickly shut down any unverified stories, threatening libel lawsuits. Outmaneuvered legally and socially, Veronica vanished from their lives, or so it seemed on the surface. That victory was bittersweet for Alexander. He felt relief that the immediate crisis was over, but was filled with shame at how far he'd sunk. He had dragged Helena through months of emotional torture and nearly destroyed their marriage. While the legal measures contained Veronica, it didn't erase the scars left behind. Only time, consistency, and unrelenting effort would do that. As Helena's due date approached, her friend Sophie insisted that Helena shouldn't miss out on a baby shower just because of the drama. So, a small gathering was arranged at a classy rooftop garden in Manhattan, overlooking the city skyline. Most of the attendees were close friends, family, and a few trusted colleagues. Alexander arrived early to help set up, placing pastel decorations and a buffet of Helena's favorite dishes. He moved quietly, still uncertain of his place in Helena's heart, but determined to be there for her. When Helena arrived, a hush fell over the room. She wore a simple, flowing dress, her baby bump prominently displayed. The atmosphere was charged with both celebration and an undercurrent of tension after. Everyone knew about Alexander's indiscretions. Yet as Helena moved from table to table, accepting hugs and well wishes, her smile returned, at least for fleeting moments. Friends presented her with thoughtful gifts, handmade quilts, children's books, and adorable outfits. In these warm gestures, she found a reminder that love and support still existed, even in dark times. Midway through the event, Alexander asked for everyone's attention. His voice wavered as he addressed Helena in front of their guests. He apologized publicly for the pain he had caused, for betraying her trust, and for endangering their unborn child's sense of security. He promised to devote his life to regaining her faith. Many eyes brimmed with tears, some out of sympathy for Helena, others from admiration for Alexander's willingness to humble himself in front of so many. Helena, tears glistening on her cheeks, nodded in acknowledgement. She didn't say much in response, only a quiet thank you. But something about her expression suggested that she appreciated his sincerity. Though the future was still uncertain, it was a moment of healing, a fragile bridge stretching between two hearts that had been so badly fractured. A few weeks later, Helena awoke to a dull ache that quickly intensified. Alarmed, she checked the clock. It was 2:00 a.m. She was nearly a month ahead of her due date, and panic flared in her chest. She tried to calm herself, focusing on her breathing. She alerted Alexander, who was staying in the penthouse's guest room, at her request. He rushed to her side, helping her with her overnight bag, and they sped to the hospital under the watchful eyes of a full moon. At the hospital, the doctors confirmed that Helena was in premature labor. Alexander stood by her side, holding her hand, whispering encouragement, tears shining in his eyes whenever she cried out in pain. It was a far cry from the illusions of a perfect life they once shared. Yet in that painful, vulnerable moment, they rediscovered a bond. Hours passed in a blur of contractions, doctors' instructions, and fervent prayers for the safety of both mother and child. Finally, at dawn, the cries of a newborn filled the delivery room. It was a baby girl, delicate and small, but alive and feisty. Helena sobbed with relief, exhaustion, and uncontainable love. Alexander cradled his daughter, hardly believing the miracle in his arms. Every regret, every betrayal, every misunderstanding seemed to fade in the presence of this new life that demanded their united devotion. That night, Alexander stayed by Helena's side in the hospital. They barely spoke, as each was enthralled by the tiny life sleeping beside them. Their daughter was named Aurora, symbolizing the new dawn they so desperately needed. In those quiet hours, Helena observed Alexander watch Aurora with reverence. She saw the sincere love in his eyes, the willingness to do anything to protect this child. For the first time since the affair was uncovered, Helena allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, Alexander had truly changed. Upon returning home, Helena found herself navigating the challenges of new motherhood, sleepless nights, constant feeding, and a tidal wave of emotions. Yet in this whirlwind, Alexander stepped up in ways she never expected. He changed diapers, rocked Aurora to sleep, and made sure Helena had healthy meals and time to rest. He also continued his therapy sessions, inviting Helena to join when she felt ready. Slowly but steadily, they rebuilt a semblance of trust. Occasionally, the ghost of Veronica surfaced in Helena's mind, a nagging doubt that perhaps Alexander would grow restless and seek another affair. But each time that fear arose, she would watch him tenderly cradle Aurora or see him earnestly engage in counseling, and a tiny voice within her whispered that people could change if they truly wanted to. Financially, Alexander had transferred a considerable portion of his wealth into a trust for Aurora and Helena. He had asked Helena if she wanted a legal separation or a postnuptial agreement that would protect her and the baby if he ever relapsed into unfaithful behavior. Helena took her time reviewing the documents, ultimately agreeing to keep her safeguards in place. "Trust is earned, not given freely," she said softly, and Alexander nodded, fully in agreement. Months passed, and Helena and Alexander became a stronger team, forging a newfound relationship based on honesty and emotional openness. Bennett Tech continued to thrive, largely because Alexander delegated more responsibilities to his executive team, prioritizing time with his family. Helena, for her part, slowly opened up to the possibility of forgiveness. She attended therapy sessions with Alexander, working through the trauma of betrayal and learning to voice her needs and boundaries. One crisp morning, as Aurora napped in her newly decorated nursery, Helena discovered a piece of unexpected news in her mailbox, a letter from Veronica, postmarked from another state. It was a spiteful note, filled with accusations claiming Alexander had broken promises, calling Helena gullible and threatening a future lawsuit for emotional distress. But there was one crucial detail. Veronica's final ploy had already fallen flat. She confessed that she had tried to trick another wealthy businessman in Chicago into believing she was pregnant, and that scheme had collapsed. The letter sounded more like a desperate rant than a genuine threat. Helena showed the letter to Alexander, who promptly contacted his lawyers, but they brushed it off. It was a baseless letter from a woman who had repeatedly cried wolf. For a moment, Helena felt a pang of anger that Veronica was still meddling, still trying to disrupt their peace. But then she realized how pathetic it was. Veronica's manipulations no longer held any power over them. They had moved on. In a way, Helena felt victorious. She had emerged stronger, armed with the unwavering love for her daughter and a husband who had learned a painful lesson. That same night, Helena and Alexander shared a quiet dinner in their penthouse living room, with Aurora sleeping soundly in her crib. They reminisced about the roller coaster of events, the affair, the lies, the heartbreak, and finally, the redemption. "I'm sorry," Alexander said once more, his eyes brimming with humility. "I can't take back what I did, but I can promise you I'm never stepping off this path of honesty again." Helena gazed at him for a long moment, then simply laid her hand on his, entwining their fingers. She knew the journey ahead would still have its challenges, but they were facing it together. In that moment, Helena understood the enormity of her triumph. She had stood her ground, refused to be a victim, and demanded accountability. She had insisted that Alexander face the consequences of his actions, and now she had the husband she deserved, chastened, genuinely remorseful, and eager to be a better man. Veronica's final attempt at sabotage had fizzled into insignificance, and Helena Bennett, once the naive wife, had indeed gotten the last laugh. Thank you for joining us on this gripping journey through betrayal, heartbreak, and ultimate redemption. In a world where trust can be shattered with a single act of deception, Alexander and Helena's story serves as a testament to the power of resilience, honest introspection, and the indomitable strength of a woman determined to protect her family. Though battered by lies and tormented by doubt, Helena never lost sight of her own worth, and in standing firm, she emerged victorious. Veronica's manipulative schemes, once potent, lost all power against true accountability and unwavering commitment. If you found this story riveting, don't forget to hit the like button, share it with friends who love a dramatic twist, and subscribe to this channel for more stories that dive into the complexities of love, betrayal, and karma's relentless pursuit. Stay tuned for more tales that will leave you breathless and inspired.